Number 50, Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City 21. You didn't think we'd start strong, did you? No, we begin in the dark, at the absolute bottom, with a film that fumbles the undead so hard, it buries them twice. Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, a name that should evoke chills, instead lumbers across the screen like a reanimated corpse of better ideas. This was the reboot nobody asked for, built on nostalgia no one needed, executed with the energy of a sci-fi original, and the horror weight of a Spirit Halloween commercial. It wanted to be a love letter to the fans. What it delivered was a Dear John note to the franchise. Let's start with the zombies. These creatures, the cornerstone of Resident Evil lore, are unrecognizable. They're not the bioorganic horrors birthed from T-virus experiments gone wrong. They're background noise. Theater kids in crusty makeup, shuffling through fog machines, groaning like they're late for their haunted hayride shift. No gore, no dread, no sense of disease or decay. They lurch, sure, but it's a lifeless lurch, a parody of fear. Gone is the biological horror. Gone is the slow burn of infection, the mounting body count, the unease that anyone might turn. What we get instead is cosplay-grade tension. You could slap a Starbucks logo on one of these things and it would still be the most detailed part of the frame. Even the settings, once dripping in atmosphere, the RPD station, the Spencer Mansion, feel flat and underlit. You can't see the horror because the lighting designer must have been allergic to contrast. The camera shakes, the dialogue stumbles, and all the while these zombies do nothing but take up screen space until the script decides it's time for a scare that never lands. What's tragic is that the DNA of something great is buried under this mess. The games are masterclasses in tension and escalation, but the film? It's a confused tribute band, singing the right notes with none of the rhythm. You might think, well, maybe it's fun in a campy way. It's not. There's no camp. Camp would have been a gift. This film takes itself just seriously enough to be boring, but not seriously enough to be scary. It's the cinematic equivalent of reheated leftovers from a better movie, microwaved until rubbery and drained of all flavor. At their best, zombies are mirrors, twisted reflections of our own fears, of disease, of collapse, of ourselves. These ones, they're cardboard cutouts, set dressing for a movie that forgot what it was supposed to be. So here they lie, at the very bottom. Number 50. Not because they're the worst executed, although they're close, but because they're the most disappointing. A wasted opportunity, an insult to a legacy, a monster with no bite. This isn't the beginning of an outbreak, it's the end of a franchise's dignity. Number 49, Z Nation. You ever shotgun a can of Monster Energy, trip into a discount Halloween store, and accidentally turn on the TV? That's Z Nation. A show that looked at The Walking Dead's somber, post-collapse dread and said, nah, what if we replace trauma with memes? And that's the thing. Z Nation isn't a bad show. It's just a ridiculous one. It knows it. It bathes in the absurd. But that comes at a cost. Fear. The zombies here are at times inventive. I'll give them that. There are radioactive zombies, cheese wheel zombies, a zombie bear. That's not a joke. It's a literal bear infected with the ZN1 virus. You've got a zombie tornado, a Z-NATO. It sounds like a sci-fi channel fever dream, and it is. But here's the catch. The more ridiculous something becomes, the less terrifying it is. When everything's turned up to 11, nothing stands out. Horror becomes background noise. And these zombies, they're fast, yes. They snarl, sprint, and occasionally act clever. But they're never looming, never dreadful, never death. They're cannon fodder. Gags. A setup for the next punchline. The apocalypse here is less a fall of mankind and more an open mic night gone wrong. Characters joke mid-fight. Zombies are used as plot tools, not threats. They become toys for writers who wanted every episode to one-up the last. And when you gamify the undead, you lose the very essence of what made them so effective to begin with. Now, that's not to say there's nothing redeeming. Z Nation does attempt emotional depth on occasion, but the tonal whiplash is dizzying. One moment, a character is grieving a lost loved one. The next, a dismembered zombie head is being used as a GPS. It's hard to feel anything when the tone changes with the wind. Visually, the show fluctuates wildly. Some effects are passable, others are late-night cable level. The zombies' designs range from grotesque to goofy, often in the same scene. You'll go from a legitimately disturbing facial prosthetic to a clearly painted extra with ketchup on their chin. It's kitchen sink horror. Everything is thrown in and very little sticks. The real tragedy? Z Nation had potential. In a different timeline, this could have been a dark, anarchic mirror of The Walking Dead, fast-paced but grounded, horrifying but energetic. Instead, it chose chaos. Entertaining, sure, but hollow. So why does it rank so low? Because despite its creativity, it forgets the fundamental rule. Zombies are supposed to be terrifying. They're not mascots. They're not joke delivery systems. They're death incarnate. And when you reduce them to carnival attractions, you lose the point. Z Nation is fun, but these aren't monsters. They're clowns in rotting skin. Number 48, World War Z, 2013. This one stings, because when you hear the name World War Z, your mind should fill with dread, with collapse, with humanity clinging to the edges of survival like the last embers of a dying fire. Max Brooks gave us that, a global oral history of the end. His zombies weren't just monsters, they were inevitability. But what Hollywood gave us? A swarm, a spectacle, a hollow echo of something once meaningful. The 2013 adaptation of World War Z should have been the Schindler's List of zombie fiction. Instead, we got a CGI wave with Brad Pitt's hair heroically blowing in the breeze. Let's talk zombies. These are not slow movers. They are sprinting, wall-scaling, pile-forming horrors. Visually, they're impressive in that abstract VFX real way. But they lack teeth, not physically, but narratively. There's no identity, no individuality. You never linger on a single one. They're not characters, not tragedies. They're physics simulations. They climb each other to scale walls, swarm like insects, pour over barriers like liquid meat. But they don't rot. They don't moan. They don't feel infected. They feel programmed. Like someone flipped a switch in a motion capture studio and told the actors to pretend you're bees. What made the book Zombies terrifying was their banality. You couldn't reason with them. You couldn't outrun them forever. They were slow, but they were coming, always. The fear wasn't in the chase, it was in the inevitability. And worse, the human cost. The film? No time for that. No room for nuance when you've got helicopters to crash and Pepsi cans to crack open, literally. The product placement is so blatant it feels like parody. Now, I'm not knocking the idea of fast zombies outright. Films like 28 Days Later made that work, beautifully. But those creatures had personality, pain, rage. These ones, they chirp, they click. They look like someone turned the Nosferatu filter on The Mummy Returns. And when the tension should peak, when the camera should hold on the aftermath of a brutal bite or a hopeless barricade, we cut to pit, to a plane, to a UN bunker. The horror isn't allowed to breathe. It's buried under noise. There are moments, small ones, that hint at what could have been. A soldier's quiet breakdown, a family's frantic escape, the chilling calm of Jerusalem's downfall. But these scenes are few and far between, suffocated by the film's need to move, always move, never linger. Even the virus itself, the Solanum strain in the novel, is stripped of meaning. Gone is the commentary on geopolitics, on misinformation, on survival through cooperation and sacrifice. In its place, a vague concept of illness and a third act Deus Ex vaccine. The zombies don't carry narrative weight. They don't challenge characters morally. They don't reveal the flaws of civilization. They just chase, bite, and fall apart on cue. And that's the true failure. Because World War Z had the blueprint for greatness, a global horror story told through the eyes of survivors, soldiers, doctors, civilians, each chapter a different tragedy. Instead, we got one man, one haircut, and a lot of running. At number 48, these zombies rank not because they're the worst. Technically, they're competent. Visually, they're overwhelming. But spiritually, they're vacant. They embody everything that happens when a horror story is told by people afraid to confront horror. They could have haunted us. Instead, they swarmed us and then faded from memory. Number 47, Army of the Dead, 2021. There's a version of Army of the Dead that lives only in trailers, all style, all threat, all promise. And then there's the movie we actually got, a chaotic, overcooked stew of half-baked ideas and Zack Snyder slow-mo. And at the center of it all, zombies that can't decide what they are. Let's rewind. Snyder isn't new to the undead. His Dawn of the Dead remake, 2004, is legitimately excellent. It knew how to balance pacing with paranoia, brutality with bleakness. But Army of the Dead feels like what happens when someone remembers the idea of zombies but forgets the rules that made them terrifying. The setup sounds decent on paper. Las Vegas is ground zero for a zombie outbreak, and the government walls it off like Chernobyl with slot machines. Inside is a horde, a mix of standard flesh eaters and new, smarter, faster alpha zombies. The twist? They're organized. They have structure. They have a king and queen. At this point, it's less zombie film and more fantasy heist with rotting extras. Let's talk about the alphas. These are not your average ghouls. They move with precision. They ride undead horses. They stage ambushes. There's a shot, not a joke, where the zombie king dons a cape and helmet like a gladiator. His queen, pregnant, with a zombie fetus. It's almost admirable how weird it gets. But weird doesn't mean scary. These smart zombies don't unsettle. They confuse. You're never sure what their rules are. Are they undead, mutated? Are they sentient? The more the movie tries to build its own zombie mythology, the more it dilutes any fear. And then we get the Shamblers, the classic Romero-style walkers. They're mostly background noise, a tidal wave of digital corpses to pad out the runtime. Occasionally, they're used well. One creepy hallway scene with pressure-triggered movement is genuinely tense, but mostly, they're just cannon fodder for slow-motion headshots and CG blood spray. Visually, the film is hyper-stylized. Bloom-heavy lenses, washed-out colors, and a digital fuzziness that feels like your monitor's dirty. That might have worked if it leaned into VHS horror grime, but instead, it's like Instagram filters met a Resident Evil mod. Worse still, tonal whiplash. Army of the Dead wants to be Aliens, Ocean's 11, and 28 Days Later all at once. There's a tragic backstory. There's quippy banter. There's a zombie tiger, because why not? But there's no fear. It's horror adjacent, not horror centric. And that's the tragedy here. Buried beneath the noise is a decent idea. A mercenary crew breaking into a quarantined hellscape to retrieve millions. It's Escape from New York with zombies. But instead of embracing bleak minimalism, it piles on lore it doesn't earn. Let's also not ignore the bloated runtime. Over 2 hours for a zombie film, and most of it isn't even about the undead. It's about character arcs that go nowhere, betrayals that don't land, and a digital ghost of a removed actor green screened into every frame. By the end, when the inevitable helicopter crash comes, because of course it does, you don't feel dread, you feel fatigue. The zombies don't haunt. They don't chase you into your dreams. They pose, they flex, they roar into the lens like pro wrestlers. So why Nerf 47? Because Army of the Dead is the definition of missed potential. The zombies are neither scary nor consistent. The story is loud but hollow, and the only thing decaying faster than the infected is the pacing. Zombies aren't supposed to have capes. They're not supposed to feel cool. They're supposed to make you feel helpless. This film forgot that. Number 46, Black Summer, Season 2 Horde. There was a moment back when Black Summer Season 1 dropped, where people whispered it might be the true successor to 28 Days Later. A low-budget Canadian surprise on Netflix with sharp pacing, quiet tension, and zombies that didn't wait for drama. They interrupted it. And then came Season 2. This ranking isn't about Black Summer as a series. It's about the zombies in Season 2. And they are chaos. Not the creeping, dread-fueled chaos of infection or collapse, but the I accidentally dropped my camera into a washing machine kind of chaos. Let's start with the good. These zombies are fast, uncomfortably fast. They don't shuffle. They don't warn you with growls. They sprint. They flail. They chase. And that should be terrifying if it weren't so numbing. Season 2 trades atmosphere for aggression. Nearly every zombie encounter is a sprint scene. Characters running down alleys, over rooftops, through snow-covered fields. It's kinetic. It's raw. But it never stops. And when everything is panic, nothing is. The zombies move like they're glitching. Heads jerk, limbs spasm. Their motions are so erratic it almost feels like they're caught in a game engine bug. That should work in their favor, right? Unnatural movement is creepy, but without stillness to contrast, it just becomes visual noise. And that's the core issue. There's no pacing. There's no slow burn, no decay, no moment of God, how did this happen? It's just run, cut, repeat. The zombies become static, which is ironic because they never stop moving. In Season 1, there was a sense of emotional weight. When someone turned, it hurt. You felt the loss. The infection was a sentence. In season 2, death is a footnote. Characters go from breathing to sprinting corpses in under 5 seconds, and it happens so frequently you start losing track of who's even alive. Now let's talk visuals. The cinematography is bold. Long takes, wide tracking shots, minimal cuts. In theory, this should ground the horror, but with the camera constantly moving and characters constantly running, it starts to feel like a GoPro strapped to a caffeine-addicted squirrel. You're not watching horror unfold, you're trying to catch your breath. The zombies themselves look solid. No cheap prosthetics, no rubbery CG, but they all look the same. There's no standout, no horrifying mutations, no rotting mass of teeth and bone, just sweaty, pale, aggressive humans in winter clothes. That may be realistic, but it's not memorable. And then there's the snow. A full season in blinding white terrain should make for stunning contrasts, red blood on white powder, shadows in the distance. But somehow it all blurs together. The zombies don't pop, the kills don't land. It feels flat, overexposed, and underdeveloped. There are attempts at world building. You get glimpses of fractured survivor factions, religious cults, snipers with PTSD, but none of it sticks. And the zombies? They're just noise. Fast, forgettable noise. Let me be clear, these aren't bad zombies. They're not cheesy, they're not over-explained, they're not sanitized, but they're empty. You could swap them out with any other threat. Wild dogs, soldiers, malfunctioning androids, and the story wouldn't change. At number 46, the Black Summer Season 2 zombies rank this low not because they're ineffective, but because they're indistinct. They're overused and underfelt. Their speed becomes their only trait, and when fear comes only in motion, it loses meaning. Zombies are scariest when they remind us of death. These ones remind us of cardio. Number 45, Fear the Walking Dead, late seasons. There was a time when Fear the Walking Dead was the zombie show to watch if you wanted something a little more grounded, a little more raw, and a little more human than its older sibling. The early seasons showed society unraveling in real time. The fear of infection, the confusion of the collapse, the disbelief as the dead walked. It was electric. But then came the time jump. Then came the shifting showrunners. And then inevitably came the walker fatigue. Let's be clear, this ranking isn't about all of Fear the Walking Dead. No, this is laser focused on the later seasons, seasons 5 onward, when the zombies became little more than set dressing. And that's the real crime here. At their best, zombies are metaphors, rot made flesh, the inescapable dread of our own undoing. At their worst, they're extras, shambling around in the background while the real drama happens. And Fear fell hard into the latter. In these later seasons, the zombies, or walkers, show up like stagehands in a theater production. You know the drill. The characters argue, someone cries, the music swells, and right on cue, a walker stumbles into frame to remind you, hey, this is a zombie show, remember? But they don't do anything. They're rarely a threat. They die as quickly as they appear, often off-screen or with a quick knife to the head. The show doesn't build tension anymore. It resets it. Characters will spend an episode meandering through drama, then a zombie horde shows up for 5 minutes of action before being dispatched. Rinse, repeat. And let's talk about the hordes. Once upon a time, a mass of walkers meant doom. It meant noise, panic, blood, claustrophobia. In Fear, they're traffic cones. You steer around them. Maybe you get a flat tire, but you're not going to die. That's a massive problem. It doesn't help that the characters are borderline invincible by this point. They all move like they're in a video game with God mode turned on. Surrounded by dozens of walkers? No worries, just duck, stab, run. Not even a scratch, not even a sweat. And don't get me started on the set design. In the early seasons, the world felt lived in, grimy, dangerous. Now, everything looks like a backlot. Fake dirt, clean costumes, no stakes. It's as if the apocalypse got too comfortable. Worse, the show's writing often forgets that the walkers even exist. There are entire episodes where the dead don't show up until the final act. Sometimes they're kept in fenced-off zones like livestock, which could be terrifying, except the show never uses it for anything meaningful. They're just there. The emotional weight is gone too. In earlier seasons, when someone turned, it hurt. You saw the sickness take them. You saw the horror in their loved one's eyes. Now, a character gets bitten, gives a speech, and we fade to black. No horror, just melodrama. And here's the kicker. The show occasionally teases interesting zombie ideas, radioactive walkers, walkers in underwater ruins, etc. But these concepts are introduced and abandoned like seasonal flavors. Nothing sticks. Nothing escalates. By season 7, walkers were so irrelevant that characters started talking about zombies more than fighting them. That's not horror. That's exposition with a body count. So why number 45? Because Fear the Walking Dead forgot the fear. Its zombies aren't scary. They're predictable. They're props. And when the dead become boring, the apocalypse loses its edge. The Walking Dead universe was built on the idea that the dead were relentless, always out there, always hungry, always one mistake away from ruining everything. But in these late seasons, the biggest threat is bad writing, and that's why they sit here. At number 45, not because the zombies were ever laughably bad, but because they became background noise. And in zombie horror, silence is death. Number 44, Day of the Dead, Bloodline. This one stings. Not because it's the worst zombie movie ever made, far from it, but because it could have been something. It had a legacy to uphold, a towering name carved into the stone of horror cinema. Day of the Dead, George A. Romero's third masterpiece. The one that gave us philosophical dread, isolation, and the unforgettable tragedy of Bub, a zombie who made us feel something. And then 2017 said, what if we remade that, but with less brains, less guts, and way more sweat? Let's talk about what Day of the Dead Bloodline does to the undead. And let's be clear, these aren't Romero's zombies. These aren't even smart remixes. They're Hot Topic knockoffs. Overlit, underwritten, and designed by someone who thinks fast equals scary. The makeup? Discount Halloween. We're talking rubber masks, splashy red corn syrup, and growling extras who lunge like they're auditioning for a Six Flags haunted house. These zombies don't rot, they pose. And the fear, it evaporates the moment one opens its mouth and screeches like a raccoon in a blender. Now let's get to the central monster, Max. A half-turned stalker zombie with abs, a vendetta, and the worst haircut in the apocalypse. He's not just infected. He's obsessed with the main character, Zoe. He retains memory. He stalks. He moans her name. He dreams of her. In theory, that's terrifying. In execution, it's icky. Max doesn't feel undead. He feels like a rejected Twilight villain with a kink for blood. There's a scene where he licks someone, and it plays not like horror, but like fan fiction. And it's framed to make us care, as if he's tragic, misunderstood, romantic even. Let's be very clear, zombies should not have crushes. Not like this. Max's intelligence isn't portrayed as eerie. It's cartoonish. He plans, he plots, he leads hordes, he stares with longing. But you're not scared of him, you're confused. His every appearance is a tonal car crash. One minute he's a drooling predator, the next he's a tortured soul. Pick a lane. The supporting zombies aren't much better. They arrive on cue, growl for a few seconds, and then get gunned down with minimal effort. There's no tension, no escalation, no dread, just noise. And the world around them? Sterile, bright, lifeless. The bunker that once symbolized human desperation and scientific hubris is now a glorified office building with mood lighting. Everyone's clean, everyone's quippy. It feels more like a CW drama than a descent into madness. There's no sense of the world ending, just bad lighting and worse dialogue. And that's the tragedy here. Day of the Dead Bloodline isn't just a bad zombie movie. It's a bad remake. It takes everything that made the original work, the existential horror, the slow burn, the idea that we are the problem, and replaces it with cheap jump scares and a sweaty stalker zombie who really wants his ex to notice him. Romero's original said, "Look what we become when the world ends." Bloodline says, what if a zombie wanted to kiss you? So why number 44? Because it's not just ineffective, it's disrespectful to the genre, to Romero, to us. These aren't monsters, they're mannequin men with fake blood and bad intentions. And in a ranking of monsters, disrespect gets you a bottom tier spot. Number 43, I Am Legend, 2007, Dark Seekers. This one hurts, because I Am Legend is the kind of film that should have defined a generation of apocalyptic horror. It had the budget, the actor, the premise, all the ingredients, but when it came time to deliver on the monsters, it blinked. It digitized, it sanitized. The Dark Seekers, as they're called, are what we're ranking here. Not the virus, not the cinematography, not Will Smith's deeply human performance, just the monsters. And the monsters are a mess. Let's start with their conception. On paper, the Crippen virus is chilling, a cure for cancer that mutates into a global plague, turning humans into light-sensitive, hyper-aggressive predators. That's gold. That's pure nightmare fuel. Imagine the philosophical terror of a world where the cure becomes the curse, where hope becomes horror, and then the CGI happened. These creatures don't feel real. They don't even feel rendered half the time. They're smooth, rubbery, uncanny valley rejects that flail and screech like unfinished video game enemies. Their mouths open too wide, their limbs move too fast, and instead of giving us something tactile and horrifying, we get a digital blob that lunges at the screen like a 2007 Blu-ray jump scare. There's no texture, no rot, no death in them, just pixels. And no matter how loud they scream, you never believe they were once human. That's the fatal flaw. What's worse is that the original intention behind these creatures was far more profound. In the book, yes, the book, the infected retain some level of sentience. They mourn, they learn, they evolve. Even in the film, there are hints of this. The alpha male reacts emotionally when one of his own is taken. There's a moment where he sets a trap, and for a second you think, is there intelligence here? Is the real monster us? But the film backs away. It doesn't commit. Instead of doubling down on that creeping dread, that maybe the infected are forming a society, that maybe we're the outcasts now, it sprints back to CGI Horror 101. Loud noises, fast cuts, glowing eyes, and no soul. And yet, the potential lingers. You feel it every time the camera lingers on a dark hallway, every time the dog growls at a shadow, every time Neville stares at an empty street and listens. The movie knows how to build tension. It just doesn't know how to pay it off with monsters that matter. The Darkseekers could have been Romero's ghouls for a new age, faster, smarter, and tragic. Instead, they're loud, forgettable, and strangely shiny. They don't rot. They don't linger. They just scream, leap, and evaporate. And for all the budget, for all the buildup, for all the moments of quiet brilliance, you walk away from I Am Legend not fearing the monsters, but mourning the lost potential. So why number 43? Because this could have been top 10. Easily. If the execution matched the idea, we'd be talking about the Darkseekers with the same reverence we give Romero's original Undead. But they fumbled it. They rushed the rendering. They muted the message. And in horror, that's unforgivable. Number 42, Resident Evil Retribution 2012. It's almost poetic. The deeper you go into the Resident Evil film franchise, the less resident and the less evil it becomes. By the time we get to Retribution, the 5th installment, it's less a zombie movie and more a CGI rave hosted by Umbrella Corp. And the zombies, they're not monsters anymore. They're assets, pawns, code. Let's start with the premise, if you can call it that. Retribution opens with our protagonist, Alice, trapped in a massive underwater simulation facility. It's a kind of Westworld meets Call of Duty nightmare. Different cities, different scenarios, all built to test biological weapons. It's all meant to showcase just how versatile and terrifying the Umbrella Corporation's creations are. But instead of terror, we get gunfu and leather. The zombies in this film are barely zombies. They're cloned, programmed, and in some cases, armed. We get sequences with the undead wielding rifles, driving motorcycles, wearing body armor. There's a whole section where Soviet zombies attack in full tactical formation, complete with helmets and mounted weapons. It's absurd. Let's be clear. Zombies are terrifying because they represent loss of identity, of control, of humanity. A former lover now hungers for your flesh. A parent groans outside your barricade. A stranger lunges with empty eyes. That's the horror. The familiarity turned alien. But in Retribution, the undead are video game NPCs. They spawn in scripted waves, march in formation, and explode in showers of CGI blood when Alice roundhouse kicks them in slow motion. It's thrilling, maybe, but it's not horror. It's not undead. Even when the film slows down, and it rarely does, the zombies are never treated like a force of nature. They're products, a tech demo. Look what Umbrella made. Aren't you impressed? No, we're not. Because the more polished and tactical these zombies become, the less threatening they are. You can shoot a soldier, you can outmaneuver a mercenary, but a horde, a tide of rot and groan and hunger, that's something else entirely. And Retribution wants none of that. There are glimmers of horror here, a clone of Alice as a suburban mother watching her idyllic life crumble into chaos. A sequence where the undead flood a simulated Tokyo street like ants through a fissure. But those moments are undercut by shaky cam action and Matrix-like choreography. There's no time for fear when the next gunfight is 12 seconds away. And don't get me started on the lickers, those grotesque mutated beasts with exposed brains and massive tongues. In the games, they were nightmare fuel. In this movie, they're glorified mini-bosses dispatched with acrobatics and grenades. There's no suspense, just style. So why number 42? Because it's not that the zombies are bad. It's that they're barely zombies at all. They've been stylized, weaponized, and stripped of meaning. They don't decay, they don't stalk, they don't scare. They just exist to be blown apart in the next slow-motion explosion. Resident Evil Retribution didn't kill the zombie genre, but it sure tried to make it marketable. And that's why these monsters, if you can call them that, end up near the bottom of this list. Shiny, fast, forgettable. Number 41, the sadness. There's a line in horror you don't just cross. You barrel through it, screaming, blood-soaked, eyes wide in disbelief. The sadness doesn't walk past that line. It obliterates it. And it does so with a smirk. Released in 2021 from Taiwan, The Sadness is a film that begs the question, what if the infected didn't lose their minds, but their morality? The result is an outbreak where the infected, and yes, we're calling them zombies here, retain full awareness, intelligence, and memory. They don't shamble, they don't moan, they commit atrocities, unfiltered, unchecked, unimaginable acts of violence, all while grinning. Welcome to the end of civilization, where evil isn't mindless, it's conscious. But let's be clear, these are not traditional zombies. They aren't corpses reanimated by a virus. They're victims of the Alvin virus, a disease that rewires the human brain to seek pleasure and pain, both giving and receiving. It turns people into sadistic, hypersexual, hyperviolent predators. And while they still spread the infection like zombies, through bites, fluids, contact, what separates them is intent. They know what they're doing, and they want to do it. Now you might be asking, why are they on this list at all? Simple, because in function, in fear, in the way they turn humans into weapons, they are among the most disturbing entries in zombie fiction. They blur the line between zombie, demon, and the worst parts of ourselves. And that's what makes them terrifying. But, and this is a big one, they're also unwatchable for many. The film revels in shock. There are scenes that aren't just gruesome, they're vile. Sexual violence, mutilation, psychological torture. The sadness doesn't pull punches, it throws haymakers, and not all of them land. Because while horror often uses revulsion as a tool, the sadness uses it as the point. The infected aren't tragic, they aren't slowly rotting souls. They're cartoons of depravity, designed to make you wince, not think. There's no allegory, no commentary, just escalating madness. And that's where it stumbles. Horror at its best lingers. It sits with you in the dark. The sadness doesn't linger. It assaults, it bludgeons, it shocks. And for some, that's enough. But for many, it crosses into performative horror. It doesn't build fear, it builds disgust. Not at the infected, but at the film itself. There's also the tonal whiplash. One moment you're in a slow burn apocalyptic setup, the next you're watching scenes so brutal they feel almost exploitative. The infected laugh, they joke, they stalk their victims with the joy of a predator who remembers what it was like to be prey. And maybe that's the scariest thing about them, their humanity. But when horror becomes a dare, a challenge to your stomach rather than your spine, it loses something. So why is the sadness at number 41? Because it is effective. It is unique. You won't forget these monsters, but they don't haunt you, they repel you. And that's a very different kind of fear. One rooted not in death, but in defilement. It's horror not of the unknown, but of the too known. The worst parts of us unleashed. It's powerful, but it's not elegant. And in this ranking, that means it gets close to the bottom. Not for lack of bite, but because its bite is all jaw, no soul.